Hello and welcome to another episode of ShowHammer. At the moment we're going through the first series of Doctor Who. Now you might have noticed that this is a different setup to what you've seen for the first 3 episodes of our Doctor Who reviews. And the reason for that is I've damaged my knee and I can't carry the equipment round to set up in the normal way. So the whole of this review is actually going to be voiceovered with some clips from the show, which actually kind of fits with what we're talking about here. Because this week we're reviewing Marco Polo, the first completely missing storyline from Doctor Who's history, and it's the one that I had to watch to review as a set of telesnaps. So, kind of fitting. Let's get straight into it. After Doctor Who was extended past its 13-episode run, several stories that weren't ready in time for the start of the series were finally able to be filmed. The first of these was Marco Polo. Sadly, this is also the first of the missing episodes, those stories that the BBC has long since lost because the BBC used to reuse film stock from its archives in order to save money. Marco Polo was erased by the BBC in 1967, the year after the second Doctor had arrived on our screens. Ironically, the BBC would have to spend far more money over the years tracking down all of the various missing episodes than it would have had to spend on new film stock if it had just kept them all. At the time it made a lot of economic sense, especially for a publicly owned broadcaster, but when you look at it from hindsight, which is of course always 2020, it does seem a little silly. Still, they weren't to know that a TV show which had quickly become a cornerstone of British pop culture might be something that they'd want to hang on to. I mean, how could they? Since Marco Polo is a lost story, this review had to be taken from the condensed telesnap version of the story that's presented as a special feature on the Edge of Destruction DVD. This has the advantage of cutting out some of the slower portions of the story while also showing off the exquisite sets and costumes that the story had to play with, and they really are wonderful. This looks like an amazing production which we sadly can't see anymore because the video footage is lost. But that's just how it is. Well, we'll make do with what we have. The Doctor is attempting to get Ian and Barbara home, but he still hasn't got proper control over the TARDIS, so while he manages to land it back on Earth, he's nowhere and nowhen near the 1960s and London. Instead, the TARDIS lands in China during the reign of the Mongol Empire. It's a fascinating period of history, so of course it's an excellent place to begin the second Doctor Who historical drama. First of all, the story presents Marco Polo as a man who is so desperate to return home that he would be willing to steal someone's property and essentially hold them hostage in order to do it. This puts a man who was usually presented in fiction as quite a heroic figure, or at least as a protagonist, in a different light to what we would usually be expecting. So right from the start, you're made very much aware that this is a story that you probably can't guess the direction of. It's such a shame then that the rest of the cast fall into the usual TV drama roles. We have the young woman who's here to show that the past treated women very badly, we have the obvious villain doing obvious villain things, and we have our 4 heroes struggling against the scenario they find themselves in. It's a surprisingly run-of-the-mill story in that respect. But it is nice to see the show narrated by Marco Polo, as that presents it in a very different light, as if this was part of his famous accounts of his travels, rather than how we would normally see an episode of Doctor Who. There's also a fantastic depiction of Kublai Khan at the end of the story. He comes across far less like the despotic Mongol warlord that many may have pictured him as, and far more as the enlightened ruler who ensured peace and good administration in his lands, which is what he actually was. The Pax Mongolia was the cornerstone of trade for many, many years, after all. Oh, and he loses half of his empire to the Doctor in a round of backgammon, which I have to admit I was not expecting to see. But don't worry, because he only goes and wins it back in the next hand when the Doctor tries to gamble his winnings to get his TARDIS back. The condensed telesnap version of this story cuts out a lot of the plot and the performances, which is only to be expected since this is a 30-minute version of a 3.5-hour story. Sometimes it misses things that, to the viewer who hasn't seen any other version of the story, would actually have been essential in order to understand what some of the characters' motivations are. In this version, plot threads don't seem to go anywhere. For example, the villain poisons the caravan's water, but then is seen emptying out all of the water supplies only a few minutes later. So what happened to the poison plot? We never get to see the end of it. Then, when the water is gone, Marco Polo says they can't reach the oasis to resupply, but then the caravan goes to the oasis, and they manage to arrive thanks to drinking condensation from inside the TARDIS. Clearly something happened in between that to make it flow better, but we don't get to see it. So as a result, it's hard to actually review this story or even talk about it as a whole, because so much of it is missing, sadly. To be honest, I didn't enjoy the story as much as I was hoping to. It's a story that could very much benefit from an animated recreation with all of the off-air recordings, so that we can get to see all 7 episodes. Getting to experience the story as it was actually presented, or as close to that as possible, would definitely improve it. If a recreated version ever arrives, or if the serial is somehow rediscovered somewhere, like those episodes that were found in a cupboard in Africa, then you can be sure that I will revisit this one in order to give this story the review that it really deserves. As it stands, though, it has a massive amount of potential that the cut-down Telesnap version fails to deliver on. Oh, and the amount of British actors in yellowface is truly atrocious. There were Asian actors available in the UK at the time, the BBC just didn't cast them. Even in the 60s, that should not have been acceptable. So in the end, it has a lot of potential and I really do want to see a full version of this, but as it stands, I can only give it 2 out of 5 TARDISes. And there you are. It's not a bad story. Actually, I kind of enjoyed it, and I don't think I came into this expecting to really get into it and get to grips with the story because of the way that it's presented. You can't see what's going on as well. You don't really get into it the same way, but it was still a compelling story, and I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. So, hopefully next week we'll be back to our normal setup where we'll be talking about the next episode, which is a lot of fun. So I hope you'll join me then, and until then, thank you very much for watching. I hope you have liked this. If you did, remember to click the like button. Share it with your friends because it really helps the show out if you share and also comment. That would be great too. So until next time anyway, I've been Zoe Kirk-Robinson. You've been watching ShowHammer Doctor Who reviews, and I'll see you next week. If you liked today's video, please consider supporting me on Patreon. And an extra special thanks goes out to Chief89 and Tepic. Thank you.